Chapter 12. Not-So-Secret Area, 51. Driving through the desert, Jake's mind played over the images of a solar system that once was and thought of the possibilities. 2 other planets in the solar system supporting life was something of science fiction. Jake snickered at that thought as he said aloud, "I live in science fiction." He wondered if there would be any traces of the civilizations that once lived there, or if all traces had been turned to solar dust with their destruction. Shortly after having that thought, it was pushed aside due to the Norcock's insistence of no new technology and that they most certainly had already scoured the solar system for any that remained since their return. From day one, Jake had felt there was something they were not telling him, even though they seemed upfront with information. But even then, you had to ask the right questions. Driving through this barren landscape caused Jake to once again reminisce on years after accepting his position as Norcock's military liaison. Time when he moved through military ranks as enlisted personnel while training, yet spending the majority of his time in the officer corps. It was during this time while finishing ranger training that he discovered what he knew of human relations with other beings wasn't really a great deal. In fact, most of his knowledge was only partial truth, and his opened eyes were less open to galactic truth than he had thought after being approached by members from HDC, Human Defense Coalition. That was when he began life as a galactic double agent. At least, that's what he thought of himself when he needed a laugh. Jake still shook his head from the thought of the information contained in his first briefing after accepting his position with the HDC. It was then that they had explained to him the Norcock's true motives and their control of world leaders since 1945, as well as how, regardless of the platforms elected officials ran on or how they had voted on bills previously, they all changed after being voted into a position deemed valuable to the Norcock's. Many under their control were evident since even things such as health issues vanished. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been the Norcock's first attempt at replacing human consciousness with their own. However, it proved unsuccessful, resulting in his death. His replacement, Harry S. Truman, was much more excitable, becoming later known as a halfling. Only 2 presidents were capable of withstanding transference, and at first the Norcock's thought they would prove to be just a minor delay of the Norcock's agendas. Then, by the 3rd year of the John F. Kennedy presidency, it was clear he would have to be removed. With just a silent visit from the Simons, measures were set in motion for his removal on November 22, 1963. After JFK's destructive effects on the Norcock's agenda, it was decided to remove him shortly after 2 failed attempts at transferences. By 1963, the Norcock's had planned on World War III, but could only manipulate things into a war in Vietnam. Even with JFK's predecessors, Lyndon B. Johnson's, successfully transferred consciousness, and those who followed, they couldn't achieve World War III. By the beginning of 1970s, the Norcock's High Council had decided to redirect efforts and begin manipulation for their next attempt. All through the 1970s, they set things in motion for what was sure to be ultimate control of mankind. Between creating artificial fuel shortages and economic crises, everything was in place. Then in 1980, everything changed. Once again, they found themselves faced with another human-elected president of the United States that they were unable to replace. This time, they moved forward with elimination after a second failed attempt for transference, and the Simons visited John Hinckley, Jr. On March 30, 1981, Ronald Reagan, the new President of the United States, was shot by Hinckley in Washington, D.C., after a speaking engagement at the Washington Hilton Hotel. Severely wounded and barely holding on to life at George Washington University Hospital, something happened that the Norcock's could not have predicted. As doctors fought vigorously to prevent Reagan from certain death, areas of his brain that had been silenced by transference attempts began communicating with other parts. Though he stood at death's door, his mind placed him in space observing other worlds. Most importantly, he was learning how mankind was being controlled. Before he had even been cleared for release, less than 2 weeks later, Reagan began work on securing his office and presidency. Next, he began secret operations to find out just who could be trusted and how many other countries were compromised. but to his dismay, there were no clear tests to behold. The only clear way discovered was intense physical eversion, such as that experienced in Ranger training. Those who have undergone transference had become incapable of physical demands greater than a casual run. For this reason, he sought to create a secret organization to combat this threat to mankind's existence. Fortunately for him, there already was one within military ranks. Reagan also installed many vaguely concealed messages to others while giving speeches. "I call upon the scientific community who gave us nuclear weapons to turn their great talents to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete."
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
Reagan quickly discovered that the Norcocks had taken notice of Earth once again after what humans named the Black Knight satellite detected atomic detonations and came to investigate. Though they were not the only race to take notice, in 1952, many crafts were spotted over Washington, D.C., with newspapers reporting the event all over the country. The Norcocks used Truman Halfling to prevent knowledge of extraterrestrial information being revealed. Project Blue Book was created to seem as though reports were being taken seriously while simultaneously spreading disbelief by labeling those who came forward as nut jobs. The Norcocks kept this project operational till 1969, when they were satisfied that a sufficient culture had been created, dismissing anyone coming forward with such claims. The Norcocks High Council embedded many halflings with the project, filtering out any real extraterrestrial encounters from their human counterparts. What the Norcocks didn't plan for was a chance encounter with the creators that had originally evolved on the planet, known as the Horyu-G, the very race Jake was currently going to meet with at Area 51. Figuring he had taken way too many walks down memory lane for one day, Jake found himself rapidly approaching the gates to what everyone else in the world knew as Area 51. Jake pressed the button rolling down the windows on both sides of his car so that the two guards on either side of the road could have an unobstructed view inside. "Good day, sir. Did you catch the basketball tournament last week?" the guard on the driver's side asked. Nothing like a security challenge question in the guise of friendly banter. Jake knew the word of the day was golf, but protocol dictated the word be incorporated into a sentence. Without missing a step, he replied, "No, I was down enjoying some sun and relaxation on the beaches of Gulf Shores." Being waved on, Jake progressed to the next stage of security, which called for him to park in a precise spot before the gate, engaging sensors that deactivated the warlock. A warlock device scrambled all electronic communications in a given area, preventing others from opening the gate, even if they possessed the correct device. With the car positioned in the same spot as he had parked in countless times before, Jake retrieved his phone from one pocket and ID card from his wallet. Placing the ID card to the back of his phone with the RFID, radio frequency identification, chip placed precisely in position, a numbered keypad appeared on the screen. Without delay, he typed in his 6-digit code before the 5-second window vanished, locking him out for the next 24 hours, something that had only occurred once. After the paperwork that had accompanied that incident, every time that followed was flawless. After 2 more security checkpoints, Jake was finally in a secure area where men and women worked on an experimental airplane to provide cover for the real purpose of the facility. Half of the personnel working in the hangar were really aeronautical scientists working to improve new designs, totally unaware they were merely part of a cover, while others roaming the grounds were specially trained security. Most personnel lived on base for 1-year rotations in order to lessen any chance of a leak. Jake was one on a very short list of people outside the base from HDC with the ability to enter and exit. Each individual on the base was required to undergo quarterly intense physical training, a measure instituted by Reagan as a deterrent for halflings. "Good morning, sir," a guard said as he worked on a mechanical device that he most likely had no idea what its use had once been. "Good morning. Looks like we might be in for some rain," Jake said, laughing. The soldier didn't appear to even look up, but Jake knew the man had already assessed him. Otherwise, Jake would not have made it near the office door he was now entering. Inside, Jake walked through what looked like a well-operating office. In this case, it was. This is where all Area 51 business was handled, from security checks to ordering toilet paper. It was also how Jake accessed Area 51's underground, which was much larger than that seen on the surface. After walking down a few halls and making 2 turns, Jake arrived at an elevator with doors that opened only by retinal scanning. "Good day, sir," a feminine voice from inside the elevator said as the doors opened. "Shepard," Jake greeted the woman, his tone bright. "You're just the person I wanted to see. You on your way down?" Shepard hesitated for a second and then replied with slight confusion in her voice. "Sir, can I help you with something, sir?" This was the first time in over a year she had been sought out by anyone, but she just assumed it was due to her being part of the historical data collection team. Very few discoveries made of the past had an impact on the future. "I stumbled across some information while on my last visit to the moon station that will be helpful to you," Jake said, maintaining his serious composure despite his excitement over the discovery. By the time they made it to Shepard's lab, Jake had told her of all 3 habitable planets once in their solar system. Shepard had been informed of Mars years ago by others on her team. Little was known of its destruction, but a 3rd habited planet had never been recorded. With the excitement of discovery boiling in his mind, Jake rushed into Shepard's lab, walking directly into someone or something. Jake stopped instantly. Instinctively, he looked up at what he had run into and soon found his eyes meeting those of Kulak. Growling echoed through his mind. Jake's heart thumped erratically as he realized his mistake, and Shepard took many steps back as a precaution. Kulak was part of a reptilian race that truly evolved on Earth, otherwise known as the Horyu-G. The shortest of them stood over 7 feet, and all of them were very aggressive. Thoughts of the last major incident with Horyu-G rushed into Jake's thoughts. It had been before his time, but surveillance footage showed quite a horrific battle. That threat came from a new scientist mistakenly pressing the wrong elevator button, descending, along with 2 Special Forces soldiers, to the lower 8 levels. By the time they returned, 2 had been killed with the 3rd severely wounded. For 3 days, a war was fought in the underground facilities, resulting in a high death toll on both sides, all from pushing the wrong button on the elevator. Now, Jake had done 2 of the most offensive things he could to a Horyu-G: touch them and look them in the eyes. Knowing Horyu-G found humans weak and soft, Jake chose to challenge Kulak with aggression in order to defuse the situation rather than feed into their beliefs. With a commanding tone, Jake demanded, "Step aside, Horyu-G, and stop blocking pathways." Kulak stood motionless, staring down at Jake, who was now stepping around the Horyu-G researcher. Jake sensed Kulak tasting the air with his tongue, evaluating his increase in body temperature to determine whether it was from fear or aggression. Still feeling aggression had the best chance to neutralizing the situation, Jake continued advancing while giving orders. "Shepard, get in here. Kulak, pull up a hologram of our solar system." Jake stood facing a table located in the center of the room. He could feel seconds tick by, each one lasting longer than the last, till first the sun appeared, followed by a full solar system. Thank God that worked, Jake thought as Shepard came alongside him. Even though the entire event lasted less than a minute, he and Shepard felt as though hours had passed by. Happy to be focused once more on his reason for being at the facility, Jake looked to Kulak, ignoring the rules about eye contact. "Kulak, make adjustments as I describe them." He began explaining what he saw, and as he did, Kulak made the necessary modifications. Look, it changed Earth's axis. Shepard pointed, unable to contain her enthusiasm. Pulsar explains a great deal. First, why the Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees and why there is a large atmospheric hole over Antarctica. With a strong hiss to his speech, Kolak expressed an emotion that was rare among Horyuji: excitement. "Oh yes, this must be time of the great Orvok 12,000 years ago. Amazing!" Jake looked to Shepard to clarify, but when she only shrugged, he asked, "Orvok?" "Yes, a time of great destruction killing millions on surface and below. It was a sudden change, flash freezing everything in the area you call Antarctica for eternity. It once was a thriving tropical land my people enjoyed greatly, till the Norcox took control of our surface, and my kind had to remain hidden." Kolak slammed his clawed fist down on the table that absorbed it with ease, having been designed to withstand beatings from Horyuji. "Flash frozen?" Jake asked. "Yes, but my people have not been able to travel there since the Great Orvok. Flash freeze ran deep, all tunnels filled with ice, and it is much too cold for my kind to survive," Kolak replied, his hiss becoming more like a snake's whenever the letter S was used. Shepard couldn't hold back any longer. "It's all still there," she shouted out, anticipating the discoveries that would be made. "Yes, it is," Jake agreed. Kolak's response was not so enthusiastic. "How can you be sure Norcox have not already gathered its technology?" "Because they lifted off shortly after the Orvok, and if possible they would have retrieved these crystals they want so badly instead of having us search worldwide for them," Jake explained, with Shepard already pulling up hologram maps of Antarctica. Shepard was already in the planning phase for Antarctica. "There aren't any vortices in Antarctica, but they are running along the 45th parallel. That will make transporting personnel, equipment, and supplies much faster. We could be operational in just a few weeks." Jake looked at the holographic maps showing a large ice-covered continent. "We can't use the vortices, not enough is known about them, or if the Norcox can monitor their use." He could see the reaction on Shepard's face, raising his hand to hold back any arguments. "They will not be needed. We already have a supply route in that area and a base similar to this one." "Let's go," Shepard blurted out. Kolak had a much different take on the idea of finding new technology in ice-covered land. 12,000 years beneath ice, all has been crushed. What do scavengers, weak humans, hope to discover? Knowing that Horyuji relentlessly insult them, Jake felt things might have returned to normal since his earlier mistake of walking into Kolak. Not all will be, and if there is a slight possibility something useful did, it is worth the effort. But I understand your sensitive nature to the cold. Having become used to insults from Horyuji, Shepard became uneasy with the way Kolak and Jake were challenging each other and tried to redirect the conversation. "Why do we already have a base there?" After a slight pause, Jake replied, "We're making progress on the craft that the Norcox crashed in Roswell, and this base was becoming too well known for testing. Thermal scans showed dozens of groups along the base's perimeter at all times, not an issue in a barren, ice-covered wasteland." "When do we go?" Shepard asked, her enthusiasm renewed. Tapping his fingers on the map, Jake replied, "Where would you start? We know there is something there, but not where. Anything in the Earthier's historical record that can help?" He turned his attention to Kulak. Information such as that was not of importance during early years of record-keeping. Till last few hundred rotations, only significant events were recorded such as the Orvok, ground shakes, and mega-eruptions. Kulak's hissing became lighter as his aggression toward Jake began to fade. "Can you dig a little deeper and bring all the information on this topic to Shepard? Never know. It might be the key to having this planet to yourselves once again, or at least with a lot fewer humans." Jake watched as the Horyuji left without saying another word. With the Horyuji gone, Jake watched Shepard's posture relax before she spoke. "Sir, you were very lucky he had his protective suit on. Had you bumped into him, making contact with the bacteria they carry, well, sir, we would be scraping a large portion of your face off right now." Jake didn't even want to think about what would have happened if Kolak hadn't been wearing the metallic scale-tight clothing the Horde-G wore whenever above the lower 8 floors. Gather all the information you can from the Horde-G, get up-to-date satellite imagery, and scan for any anomalous energy readings. "Sir, how are we going to keep this secret from the Norcox?" Shepard asked, almost timidly, her eyes shifting about as though searching for Norcox surveillance. "From the crash in 1947, we know their bodies will not survive here. Any scan is rendered useless, and if they attempt travel through the vortices, they have such pain in their skulls. Well, let's just say they aren't going to come that way," Jake answered confidently. "What about the Zoetarians informing them? Their trio craft made from diorite seem to have no problem traveling anywhere virtually undetected." Shepard appeared afraid of even mentioning the Zoetarians' name. "They are only interested in using us for protein, and as long as they don't collect too many people or allow themselves to be seen, the Norcox pay no attention to them. Now I have to make preparations with the Antarctic base, and I want regular updates." Jake finished his orders as he walked out of the lab, preventing any further discussion.